There is a rather significant debate happening right now on the right over Donald Trump's position on the abortion question and over, more generally, the pro-life movement's objectives in terms of policy and how Trump, according to many people who are his critics in this case, is not exactly being conducive towards them. So in this video, we're going to address the abortion question within the context of this recent controversy, and we're going to explore some of the arguments being made by the pro-life establishment against Donald Trump, and we're also going to explore how this issue can be resolved in a manner that I think is the most morally and philosophically conservative, consistent way to handle this. So this is not a video about the morality of abortion. I believe abortion is immoral. This is rather a video about this particular debate that is happening right now on the right. But before we get into that, my friends, hope all of you are doing well. I am Christian Watson. Thank you so much for being here. If you enjoy political and social and cultural commentary, because we're going to be doing some more cultural stuff eventually, from a philosophical bent, then I must implore you, please like, share, comment, subscribe, do whatever you can to get our message out there, my friends. Even if you disagree with me, my goal here is to build an army of thinkers and to energize the American public to think about politics in an uncommon way so that we can reach some uncommon heights that are rather integral to the American way of life. So thank you guys so much for being here. Now please enjoy the video. So, Lila Rose, a prominent social media influencer, and several other people, such as Dr. Jordan B. Cooper, someone who I like a lot, have been making a rather tough case on X and across the media against a second Donald Trump term on the grounds that he is insufficiently pro-life, amongst other things. Now, we have to also go into why Rose and other people that are making this case believe this. Donald Trump recently made a series of comments that has thrown his credibility with some people in the pro-life movement into question. So number one of the biggest things that have happened is that Donald Trump has recanted on the Republican platform this desire for a federal abortion ban. He has said that he will not do it. Number two, Donald Trump made a social media post on Truth Social basically saying that his administration will be great for reproductive rights. And number three, Donald Trump has promoted IVF and even said at a rally that he would actually impose federal funding for IVF and federal mandates for IVF in the name of addressing the fertility crisis that the Western civilization currently faces. Now, another one on there as well. Donald Trump also made a comment on Amendment 4 in Florida, which is basically an amendment that would expand access to abortion, and he essentially said something that seemed supportive of it, but ultimately, after he said that, he walked it back a little bit and said he does not know how he's going to vote. All of these things has compelled people like Lila Rose and others to say they will not vote for Donald Trump and that he is insufficiently pro-life. Lila Rose made a comment that actually kind of encapsulates this position. She said, and I quote, "If you look at the 2016 campaign, he was much more vocally pro-life than he is now, and he had more public promises to do pro-life advocacy. Now, he's changed his position. And he is not only not saying pro-life things, he's actively saying he would support pro-abortion policy," Rose told Politico, according to National Review. She goes on to say, "That's a very important distinction, and no amount of, well, it's just politics can cover up that fact." She goes on to say something else as well. "Vance has come out and said that Trump would veto an abortion ban, that he supports abortion pills, so on and so forth." She continues to walk through her objections to Donald Trump's current position on abortion. So Lila Rose's objections, and I'm going to use Lila Rose as kind of the spokesperson for the current pro-life, anti-Trump movement that's happening right now, are threefold. Number one, Trump's pro-life policy is not muscular enough. He's not willing to use the power of the federal government to address the issue of abortion. Number two, his rhetoric is not pro-life enough. He's not saying the right things that the pro-life movement wants him to say. And number three, his rhetoric is ambiguously pro-choice, with him invoking the phrase reproductive rights, which many of us understand is really a euphemism for a false category that actually has nothing to do with rights and everything to do with the negation of rights. See, rights presuppose living people, because rights are simply the qualities that living people possess that allow us to live morally. So reproductive rights, as a euphemism for abortion, is simply the negation of life. Therefore, it's the negation of rights. A little bit of philosophy there, but it's very important to understand these core concepts. So let me walk through a few of my thoughts on this before I actually zoom out, because this debate is actually a debate that can only be understood in the context of the history of political ideas. Never mistake debates on contemporary issues as ephemeral musings that will simply be active one time in one case and then tomorrow will be irrelevant. No, there is a kind of theme, a kind of cycle to the history of ideas, where ideas that were talked about 50 and 60 years ago, as this issue was, I'm going to talk about that in a second, pop up 50 years later, and they oftentimes take a new form. But fundamentally, they're about the same exact thing. So in order to understand this issue, we have to understand that. But let me just walk through some of my thoughts. So personally, I will give you my opinion. I am 110% pro-life in every single case. I come to this position from a philosophical evaluation of the question of abortion. In fact, I have a video in the works where I'm going to be walking through some of the famous cases, some of the famous arguments for abortion made by people like Judith Jarvis Thompson in her famous essay that she wrote back in the 70s or 80s, I forgot when, made by a lot of different people, because I think that it's very important for conservatives to understand that we do have not only the moral argument, we also have the scientific argument and the philosophical argument as well on this very important issue. Having said that, my personal convictions, and I'm going to get into this a little bit in the video, cannot be the only standard by which I understand how political authority is exercised. Most of the people that are making these arguments against Donald Trump right now, and by the way, I'm not a partisan. I'm not even a registered member of any party. I am an independent. Philosophically, I am a constitutional conservative, so I'm not a partisan, so I don't really care. I will criticize Trump, I will criticize Biden, I'll criticize whoever. But a lot of the people who are making these comments about Donald Trump are doing so from a point of their own personal tastes without actually considering the totality of the picture and the factors at play within the picture when it comes to crafting policy around abortion. But before we get into all that, let's go back again to what I said, the history of ideas. So, the pro-life movement has been around for a very long time. It was jump-started, especially in the 1970s, post-1973, after Roe v. Wade was decided on by the court. And one of the major spokespeople for the pro-life movement back then was the moral majority that was headed by Jerry Falwell Sr., amongst many other people. And they were the cultural voice on the issue of abortion. The moral majority, of course, was an incredibly evangelical, incredibly Protestant Christian organization. They had a lot of, in their own version of Christian values. They were very religious-based and everything. And I don't agree with everything the moral majority said or did. I have my criticisms of what they said and did, but I do think on this issue, they had both moral and political clarity in the broadest sense. So after Roe v. Wade was passed, there was no musings or there was no serious push to get a federal abortion ban, nor was that the panacea of the abortion problem. See, today, Lila Rose and other people are trying to push the federal abortion ban as the panacea of the abortion problem, as the most definitive assertion of one's pro-life bona fides. But those who came before them, who were far more religious, who were far more passionate about this issue, didn't see things the same way. Instead, after Roe v. Wade, you had a few legislative things happen, but these legislative things happened within the context of ensuring there could be an incremental approach to tackling the widespread availability of abortion. So number one, the Helms Amendment that was drafted by Jesse Helms. The Helms Amendment, which was short for Helms Amendment to the Foreign Assistance Act, quite simply restricted federal funds going to fund abortions in other countries. Now, it had other goals as well, like if, for example, the Helms Amendment tried to define life happening at the point of conception. So it was not just an attempt to regulate foreign aid, although that's primarily what it was. It was primarily an attempt to assert a certain idea about life in how the America spends its dollars around the world. And by the way, I personally think that the discussion there is a little bit incomplete without actually addressing the fact that foreign aid, one of the biggest scams and boondogglies of modern political thinking. That's a different story, different day. So you had the Helms Amendment that did something. Then you had the Hyde Amendment. Now, the Hyde Amendment is even being debated and tweaked today. The Hyde Amendment, in its original form, was meant to restrict federal funding for abortions. That means that Medicaid or government-funded programs could not be used to pay for abortions. Now, throughout the years, the Hyde Amendment was regulated by several people. It was amended. You had Bill Clinton that amended it, that said, okay, in the Hyde Amendment, we can allow funding for abortions in cases of rape or incest, like egregious cases, so on and so forth. But still, it is still a very, very hotly contested issue in the sort of pro-life area. But the Hyde Amendment and the Helms Amendment both represent something that I think the modern day pro-life movement is forgetting. These were both two tangible things that did have an impact in some way on the ability to have abortions. I'm not going to really mince words here. And in that way, it positively influenced the trajectory of the pro-life cause. But the moral majority understood that the legislation was not going to be enough. They understood this was fundamentally a cultural fight. So I must take you to two people who were kind of the harbingers of the moral majority's perspective on abortion, who directly influenced Jerry Falwell Sr. He literally took from their talking points. Francis Schaeffer and C. Everett Koop. They wrote a book called Whatever Happened to the Human Race. This is a big book that goes into a lot of different things that were occurring back during their time about civilization. It's an interesting book. I don't agree with everything it says, but it's a very interesting book. But one of the most important observations in that for Koop and for Schaeffer was that the abortion fight was fundamentally a cultural fight. In fact, an essay on the moral majority notes that, and I quote, that Schaeffer and Koop asserted that it was a contemporary social and sexual mores that led to abortion becoming more permissible within American society and was the main underlying factor in leading to the country to an immoral state of affairs. And so they made the argument against abortion by drawing parallels to infanticide, by drawing parallels to other depraved acts that essentially, in their opinion, had much of the same effect, but were viewed differently because the cultural perspective around them was fundamentally different. So why am I taking you down this sort of historical pathway? Because in order to understand where we are, we must understand in the history of ideas how this debate has progressed. The moral majority was more than fine taking incremental steps. In fact, they explicitly said so to address abortion. And all those incremental steps resulted in a post-Roe v. Wade world where the abortion question can now be dealt with in a manner that is more effective than simply snipping funding to it from the highest level of authority. So, if this practical strategy has worked before, the modern-day pro-life establishment is not doing itself any favors by ignoring a similar strategy that is more adapted for the times of our current day as opposed to the times of the moral majority. Now, there's also something else that is happening here beyond not being practical and beyond not being strategic. And this is an ignorance of political principles and how they interact with personal values. I mentioned this briefly, I alluded to this briefly, but I'm going to now go into it a little bit more. The pro-life movement right now is conflating fundamentally means with ends. And what do I mean by this? So, quite simply, my friends, a federal abortion ban is unconstitutional. And as a constitutional conservative, I am someone that fundamentally believes that political order must be restrained to a certain set of principles in order to ensure that it does not lapse into a sort of tyrannical arrangement. And the Constitution, even though it is certainly a flawed document, as all documents made by humans are, is the best vanguard to ensure that tyranny does not arise in a palpable extent. And of course, we can debate if it's been effective or not, but in principle, that's what it is. And so, in the sense of that, the federal abortion ban runs contrary to two principles that are embodied in the Constitution. Number one, federalism, the idea that states should be able to regulate their own matters. Number two, subsidiarity, the idea that local areas know best how to handle themselves. Subsidiarity is a fundamentally Christian principle. It goes all the way back hundreds of years of Catholic thinking. And then goes into Christian, more Protestant thinking as well after the Reformation. Fundamentally, Christian principle basically says that local communities should be the ones that govern themselves. There should be self-governing communities. The American experiment took after these two ideas and enshrined them into our political order. Well, when pro-lifers refuse to differentiate between means, i.e., how are we going to ensure that abortion is no longer a reality in America, and ends, i.e., what is our ultimate goal, i.e. abortion not being a ultimate reality in America, when they refuse to distinguish between these two, they set themselves up for disappointment and they risk erroneous thinking surrounding the issue they claim to care so dearly about. They risk an unsound analysis of the issues at hand. So, the means of obtaining something must conform to the principles and the categorical requirements of those means. Let me break this down. So let's say I'm trying to obtain obtain a goal through political means. Well, if I'm trying to obtain a goal through political means, that means the way I go about obtaining that goal is entirely separate from non-political means, from social means more so than political means. So in a classically Republican system like America has, subsidiarity, checks and balances, localism overall reigns supreme in how issues should be handled. And any use of political means can only be justly undertaken with these ideas and with these principles in mind. Any attempt to leverage the political system in a manner that defies its limiting principles is simply tyranny in the Jeffersonian sense. Thomas Jefferson said that tyranny happens when so much of power is accumulated within a single part of government and there's no sufficient way to check that. Well, that can both happen in terms of the federal government itself having a disunity, having a sort of a discohesion between the different branches, or it can happen from the federal government impinging upon the state's ability of self-governance. Nothing, not even a goal as virtuous as stopping abortion, can justify the divorce of power and first principles from operating co-equally. And that is ultimately what people who criticize Trump for not wanting a federal abortion ban are saying. They are saying they want power and first principles to operate in an unequal way. They want power to be divorced from first principles. And by doing that, they allow power to become a tool of tastes, not something to be regulated succinctly and precisely by principles. Simply put, only someone that conflates means and ends without recognizing the limits and the requirements of both would be a person who could in good conscience make an argument that Donald Trump is somehow becoming pro-choice, or that his pro-life bona fides are not really all that good for the pro-life movement were he to assume the role of presidency again. This is a dangerous conflation. I'll give you an example of how dangerous this conflation can be. Let us say, for example, that Donald Trump did say that he wanted to have a federal abortion ban. And let us say that he was able to get a federal abortion ban passed through Congress, which would be almost impossible. But let's say that actually happened. Now, let's say that same power that he has to impose the will of the federal government upon the states was taken and it was applied to other things as well. Well, first of all, you would have a bunch of different legal arguments that would emerge by virtue of that. And you could have a possibility where the use of that power is either legitimized by the Supreme Court or it is accepted in some way by the Supreme Court in other cases as well. Power oftentimes mutates in its jurisdiction. It grows in what it's able to affect. It'll one day try to affect something, then the next day it'll try to affect something else. This is not a slippery slope as much as it is simply recognizing the nature of power. So it is best to use power within restricted domains, even if that means not being able to effect the issue that you want to affect in that proper venue. The states or the proper form for dealing with abortion, just as the states are the proper form for dealing with the issue of murder. So the pro-life movement really has to go beyond this conceptual confusion and understand that their personal Christian values cannot always neatly translate into political action, because political action exists in a different realm that has different rules and laws than their own personal tastes and beliefs. Now, some may say, well, Christian, he made a comment about Amendment 4. But I'll say to you, it doesn't actually matter what he thinks about Amendment 4. He's running to be president of the United States. He's not running to be the governor of Florida or the governor of Georgia. He's running to be president of the United States. And within that context, his ability to affect abortion level policy has already worn itself out with the overturn of Roe v. Wade by appointing certain justices. So in all reality, him being president has no tangible impact on Amendment 4 or any other abortion measure that is taken up by any other state. Again, this is an example of people allowing their personal emotions to cloud their judgment because something is near and dear to their heart and they feel a certain way about an issue, but they don't understand that the means have to conform to the way the means are meant to conform to and not simply to your desires. Look, there are plenty things you can criticize Donald Trump on. Goodness knows I have my own disagreements with him on several issues. But there's also plenty of things you can give him credit for, and there's also issues that you can avoid by simply understanding distinctions. This is an issue that requires a good understanding of distinction. Perhaps the current pro-life movement should take a page out of the moral majority's handbook, just this once. I would never suggest it in any other case, but just this once, in understanding that abortion is first and foremost a cultural battle, and that cultural battle is made ever more relevant by the localization of the issue. And so it is up for us to make the moral argument, the spiritual argument, the philosophical argument against abortion and for life, and to do so in a manner that conforms to the proper means. The ends never justify the means. Because the moment that the ends justify the means is the moment you are willing to justify evil in the name of supposedly stopping evil. But evil plus evil does not make good. Tyranny plus a good goal does not make it any less tyrannical. We must pursue things in the proper way. So, in my opinion, this debate should be put to rest. And people should rest assured that this issue is going to continue to be an issue that must be incrementally dealt with. But much of the battle has already been won. And that should be reassuring to all of us who most certainly affirm the sanctity of life and wish to see an America where not a single unborn life is extinguished by an abortionist. That's the America I want to see. But I understand that we're not going to get there by misjudging issues, by confusing issues, by mixing taste with principles, and most importantly, by besmirching the person who helped us get to a post-Roe v. Wade world. I don't think so. There's a better way to this. There's a better way to talk about this issue. And I really think that we should all begin doing that so that we can actually bring forth the world that we want to have exist. My friends, like, share, comment, subscribe, do whatever you can to get this message out there. My friends, the pro-life movement can succeed one battle at a time, and it will succeed if we keep our message on point and if we understand how to fight the battles in the right way. My friends, study history, study philosophy, remain morally convicted, and please stay pensive. Bye, guys.